All right, let's get started. Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of Montessori education.
Ooh, this will be interesting.
It really will. We've got a ton of sources to pull from.
Oh, yeah.
Articles from the American Montessori Society,
Yes.
some excerpts from academic journals, and even a whole book list,
Oh, wow.
all about wordless picture books.
Sounds fascinating.
Our goal today is to give you a really solid grasp of what makes this approach to education so unique.
Yeah.
Whether you're thinking about Montessori for your own child or just curious about alternative education,
Right.
we're going to cover it all.
I think what's really exciting about this deep dive is that we're going beyond just the basics of Montessori. We're really going to uncover some things that people might not expect.
Yeah, and maybe even challenge a few assumptions about what Montessori is all about.
For sure.
So, speaking of assumptions, let's address the elephant in the room right away.
Okay.
A lot of people think Montessori is, just for preschoolers.
Right.
But is that really the whole story?
Not at all. I mean, yeah, we've all seen those pictures of toddlers carefully pouring water and arranging flowers.
Right.
Which is definitely part of it.
Yeah.
But Montessori programs actually go way beyond that.
Okay.
They span from infancy all the way through adolescence and even, in some cases, into adulthood.
Wow, so it's really a whole philosophy of education then.
It is, yeah.
Not just a preschool model.
Definitely not.
So if it's not just preschool, then what is the core idea behind Montessori? What's at the heart of it?
Well, I think at its heart, Montessori education is about shifting the focus from teaching to learning.
Interesting.
It's recognizing that kids are naturally curious, they're capable,
Yeah.
and that they really thrive in an environment that supports their individual needs and interests.
That actually makes me think about another common misconception about Montessori, which is that it's all about free play.
Right.
Is that accurate?
It's definitely more nuanced than that. Yes, there's a big emphasis on child-directed work and giving kids that freedom to choose what they want to work on. But there is also a very intentional structure to the Montessori curriculum.
Right.
It's about providing a really carefully prepared environment where kids can explore and experiment and learn at their own pace.
One thing that's always intrigued me about Montessori is this idea of sensitive periods.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Could you explain that a bit more for our listeners?
So sensitive periods are these windows of opportunity
Yeah, okay.
when kids are basically primed to learn specific skills.
Interesting.
It's like their brains are saying, okay, right now is the perfect time for me to master this.
It's about capitalizing on those moments when they have this intense interest and they're developmentally ready to learn.
Exactly. So instead of forcing a kid to learn something that they're not quite ready for,
Right.
we can observe what they're interested in and provide them with experiences that align with their current sensitive period.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, so between the ages of 2.5 and 6, a lot of kids are in a sensitive period for reading. They're fascinated by letters and sounds.
Yeah.
And they're just eager to crack the code of written language.
I can just picture a kid excitedly sounding out words for the first time.
Yes, exactly.
That's cool.
And understanding sensitive periods isn't just for Montessori teachers.
Right.
It's something that any parent, any caregiver, or any educator can use to create a more supportive and effective learning environment
That makes sense.
for the kids in their lives.
Okay, let's take a little trip back in time now and talk about the woman who started it all,
Right?
Dr. Maria Montessori.
Yeah, she was a true visionary.
So back in the early 20th century, she was already kind of challenging the traditional view of education, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And her first children's house, or Casa dei Bambini, in Rome, was a really groundbreaking experiment.
It really was.
So tell me about it. She took a group of underprivileged kids who had basically been labeled as difficult or unruly.
And she put them in this really stimulating environment, right?
Yeah, filled with all these carefully designed materials.
Exactly.
And what happened? I'm on the edge of my seat.
Well, the results were astonishing, honestly. These kids who had been kind of written off by society,
Wow.
they just blossomed into these engaged and focused learners.
That's amazing.
It was really a testament to the power of a well-prepared environment and a belief in the potential of every child.
It's incredible. And it really speaks to the idea that every child has this innate desire to learn.
Yeah.
And that our role as adults is to create the conditions that allow them to thrive.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to another key element of the Montessori approach, the curriculum.
Okay.
What actually happens in a Montessori classroom.
Right.
So we know there's those beautiful, specially designed materials,
Yeah.
but is it all just playing with blocks and beads?
Well, those materials are definitely a hallmark of Montessori. The curriculum is way more than just playing.
Oh.
It's a very carefully structured approach
Uh-huh.
that covers a really wide range of areas.
Like what?
From practical life skills
Mm-hmm.
to language to math to science and culture.
Wow.
It's very comprehensive.
So tell me a little bit more about those practical life skills.
Okay, so practical life activities might seem really simple at first.
Right.
Things like pouring water,
Uh-huh.
washing hands,
Yeah.
buttoning clothes, those kinds of things.
Right.
But they're actually super powerful for young kids.
Why is that?
Well, because they're building those foundational skills for independence and self-sufficiency.
That makes sense.
And these activities also help them develop their concentration,
Uh-huh.
fine motor control,
Okay.
and even a sense of order.
Interesting. And these tasks, even though they seem mundane,
Yeah.
they actually tap into those sensitive periods we were talking about, right?
They do. For example, between the ages of 0 and 3,
Mm-hmm.
kids are in a sensitive period for order.
Okay.
They crave routine,
Yeah.
predictability, and they're driven to create order in their world.
It's so funny. That makes me think about how my toddler gets upset if we deviate from his bedtime routine,
That's a perfect example.
even slightly.
Yeah, and by providing them with these opportunities to do these practical life activities,
Oh.
we're not only helping them master these essential skills,
Right.
but we're also supporting their natural developmental needs.
So it's meeting them where they are.
Exactly.
Okay, so practical life is one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
But what about those other areas of the curriculum, like language and math?
Well, Montessori classrooms are filled with all these really cool materials
Yeah.
that help kids explore these concepts
Okay.
in a hands-on and engaging way.
I love that.
So, for example, there's the sandpaper letters.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about those.
They're literally sandpaper cutouts of the letters,
Okay.
and they allow kids to trace the shapes of the letters and feel the forms of them
Yeah.
while they're learning the sounds.
So it's a multi-sensory experience
It is.
that helps them really solidify what they're learning.
Exactly. And the same principle applies to the math materials.
Okay.
So instead of just memorizing these abstract symbols,
Right.
kids are using things like the number rods and the bead chains
Mm-hmm.
to experience quantities and patterns and relationships.
So they're making those abstract concepts more tangible and concrete.
Exactly.
I love that.
And this hands-on approach is key to sparking a kid's intrinsic motivation.
Okay.
So they're not learning because they have to.
Right.
They're learning because they want to, because they're curious and engaged.
And speaking of engagement, I want to talk about the role of storytelling in the Montessori classroom.
Yeah,
Because one of our sources was actually a whole book list for wordless picture books.
I love that.
Me too.
Wordless picture books are fantastic for language development,
Really?
even before kids can read independently.
Interesting.
So, for example, there's this book called Anno's Journey.
Mm-hmm.
It has these really detailed illustrations.
Okay. And they basically invite kids to create their own stories.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And to make predictions about what might happen next.
Mm-hmm.
And to develop their understanding of sequence and narrative structure.
That's so cool. It's like a visual treasure hunt.
It is.
And it allows kids to engage with literacy at their own pace, using their own imagination as their guide.
Exactly. And that's a key principle of the Montessori approach.
Yeah.
Meeting the child where they are developmentally
Yeah.
and fostering that natural love of learning.
Now, we've been talking about Montessori in a general sense, but it's important to note that it's not just a private school thing anymore.
Right. Public Montessori schools are on the rise.
They are.
Yeah. There are over 550 across the United States,
Wow.
which speaks to a growing recognition of the value of this approach.
Yeah, but that growth also presents some unique challenges, I imagine.
It does, yeah.
Like how to reconcile the individualized, child-centered approach of Montessori
Hmm.
with, the demands of standardized testing and government mandates. That's a big one.
Yeah.
There's definitely a tension there that these public Montessori schools are constantly having to navigate.
One of our sources, a research article from South Carolina,
Right.
actually looked into this very issue.
Oh, interesting.
So what did they find?
Well, it's fascinating. They found that higher fidelity to the Montessori model was actually more common in programs with a greater proportion of economically disadvantaged students and students of color.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think that might be?
Well, it suggests that maybe schools serving more marginalized communities are more open to alternative models like Montessori because those models prioritize meeting the unique needs of each child.
I see.
So there might be a deeper understanding in those communities of how traditional education approaches often fail to serve these populations well.
That raises some really important questions about equity and access.
It does.
How do we ensure that all children, regardless of their background or zip code, have access to high-quality education that meets their individual needs?
And how do we balance the benefits of a student-centered approach like Montessori with the realities of standardized testing?
Yeah, that's the big question.
It is.
These are complex issues with no easy answers.
For sure.
But they're essential conversations to have as we strive to create more equitable and effective educational systems for all children.
Absolutely. We need to be thinking critically about our assumptions about education and challenging the status quo.
I like that.
And speaking of thinking critically, one of our sources introduces this really relevant idea: the importance of unlearning.
Unlearning. Okay, tell me more about that.
So unlearning is about taking a step back.
Okay.
And critically examining our own biases and assumptions.
Interesting.
Especially those related to race, culture, and privilege. It's about recognizing how our own perspectives might be limiting our ability to really see and understand the needs of others.
So it's about challenging our own ingrained beliefs and being open to new ways of thinking and doing. And how does that connect to Montessori education?
Well, Montessori at its core is about recognizing and respecting the individual needs of each child, regardless of their background or ability. It's about creating an environment where every child feels seen, valued, and empowered to learn and grow.
But to do that effectively, we need to be constantly examining our own biases and assumptions and be willing to adapt our practices to meet the needs of all learners.
Exactly. So unlearning is this ongoing process, and it's essential for both educators and parents who really want to support children in a truly equitable and inclusive way.
Okay, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm thinking about the lasting impact of Montessori education.
Yeah.
What is it about this approach that continues to resonate, even after all these years?
Well, it's more than just methods or materials, right? It's a whole philosophy, a way of looking at the world and understanding the potential that lies within every child.
And that philosophy is backed by a growing body of research, too.
That's right. There's ongoing research looking at the effectiveness of Montessori education, particularly for children with disabilities and neurodivergences. And there's research on the long-term benefits, from academic achievement to social-emotional development to a love of lifelong learning.
One concept that really stood out to me in our sources was the cosmic task.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain that to our listener?
So the cosmic task is this beautiful term that's used in Montessori to describe humanity's responsibility to care for the planet and each other.
I love that.
It's about understanding our interconnectedness and recognizing that our actions have ripple effects that extend way beyond ourselves.
So it's about fostering this sense of purpose and responsibility, not just for our own well-being, but for the well-being of the planet and all its inhabitants. And that concept is woven throughout the Montessori curriculum, right?
It is. From those practical life activities that emphasize caring for the environment to the cultural studies that foster a sense of global citizenship.
So it's about fostering not just academic skills, but also social responsibility and a love of learning that extends beyond the classroom walls.
Exactly.
And it's a philosophy that's just as relevant today as it was when Dr. Montessori first developed these ideas.
Absolutely.
As we move into the next part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder.
All right.
How can the principles of Montessori education observation, respect for the child, and a focus on hands-on learning inform our approach to teaching and learning in a world that's constantly evolving?
That's a great question.
We'll explore that further in the next part of our deep dive. Where we'll take a closer look at how those Montessori principles translate into practice in different learning environments.
I'm looking forward to it. Welcome back to our deep dive into Montessori education.
Yeah, we're really getting into the nitty-gritty now, exploring how this child-centered approach actually plays out in, real-world learning environments.
Right.
And today we're focusing on a few key aspects that make Montessori so unique.
Right.
The role of the teacher, the importance of observation, and the magic of mixed-age groupings.
I like that, the magic.
I'm particularly interested in the role of the teacher, because it seems so different from the traditional model of the teacher standing at the front of the classroom delivering information.
Yeah, it's a big shift.
So in a Montessori classroom, the teacher isn't the center of attention.
Not at all.
They're more like a guide, a facilitator, a keen observer.
One of our sources describes it as the teacher acting as a guide, helping each child embark on this personalized journey of discovery.
I love that analogy.
And gently adjusting the course along the way.
It really captures the essence of like child-directed learning.
Yeah.
But also makes me wonder,
what's that?
How does the teacher know when and how to adjust that course?
That's where observation comes in. It's really the cornerstone of Montessori education.
Interesting.
By carefully observing each child, the teacher gains this deep understanding of their individual strengths, interests, and areas where they might need a little extra support.
So it's not just about, like, watching them play.
No.
It's about truly seeing them.
Right.
Understanding their unique learning styles and developmental needs.
One of our sources talks about how important it is to really hone those observation skills.
Yeah.
It's noticing those subtle cues.
What kinds of cues?
Like a child's fascination with a particular material.
Okay.
A sudden burst of energy. Or maybe a moment of frustration that could indicate they need a different approach.
That's so interesting. It makes me think about that old saying, children learn best through play.
Yeah.
But in a Montessori classroom, it's not just about play for play's sake, is it?
No, not at all.
It's about something more.
Right. Observation allows the teacher to see that deeper learning happening within those moments of play, those seemingly simple interactions with materials and peers.
And to make sure that each child is challenged appropriately.
Yes.
And supported effectively.
Exactly.
Okay, so speaking of supporting each child's individual journey,
all right,
let's talk about another key element of the Montessori approach.
What's that?
Mixed age groupings.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
You'll typically find children of different ages learning together in a Montessori classroom.
Right. For example, in a primary classroom.
Okay.
You might have 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds all working together.
Which is quite different from the traditional grade level system.
Yeah, very different.
Where children are grouped primarily by age.
Montessori believed that mixed age groupings offer all sorts of benefits.
Such as?
Well, younger children learn by observing and interacting with older children.
That makes sense.
They pick up new skills and concepts through osmosis. Almost. And then the older children benefit too.
How so?
They gain leadership skills and a sense of responsibility by helping and mentoring their younger peers.
I see.
So it creates this really dynamic and collaborative learning environment where children are constantly learning from and with each other, not just from the teacher.
It's like with siblings. Sometimes younger siblings learn so much just by watching their older sibling.
Exactly. And in a Montessori classroom, those peer interactions are a really important part of the learning process.
One of our sources connected this idea of mixed age groupings to Dr. Montessori's concept of the planes of development.
Oh, yeah.
The planes of development.
It's fascinating.
I've never heard of that before.
So Dr. Montessori observed that children go through 4 distinct periods of growth.
Okay.
From birth to 6 years, from 6 to 12, from 12 to 18, and from 18 to 24.
So it's a holistic view of development that goes way beyond those traditional school years.
It does.
Interesting.
And each of these planes is characterized by specific needs and predispositions.
Okay, so like what kinds of things?
Well, for example, children in the first plane.
Okay.
From birth to 6. They're driven by this sensory exploration of their world.
Makes sense. They're taking it all in.
They're absorbing everything like little sponges.
And then what about the second plane?
So children in the second plane, from 6 to 12, they're starting to develop more abstract thinking skills.
Okay.
And this growing sense of social justice and responsibility.
I see.
And the mixed age groupings in the classroom are designed to align with these developmental stages. So children can interact with peers who are at different points along their own journeys.
That's really interesting.
So a younger child in the first plane who's still exploring concretely might be inspired by watching an older child in the second plane who's starting to grasp those more abstract concepts.
That creates a really cool dynamic.
It does. It fosters this sense of community and shared learning.
All right. Shifting gears a bit, I want to hear more about the Montessori curriculum itself. So we've talked about practical life activities.
Yeah.
And those specialized materials.
Right.
But what else is there?
Well, the Montessori curriculum is incredibly rich.
Yeah.
It covers a wide range of subjects.
Give me some examples.
Language, math, science, culture, history, geography, art, music, you name it.
Wow. It really is a holistic approach to education.
It is. And each area of the curriculum is approached with that same emphasis on hands-on learning, exploration, and discovery.
One area that I'm really interested in is the Montessori approach to language development.
Right.
We talked about the sandpaper letters earlier,
Yeah.
but tell me more.
So language is seen as the foundation for all other learning in Montessori.
Yep.
And kids are immersed in a rich language environment right from the start.
So they're surrounded by books, they're engaged in conversations, encouraged to express themselves both verbally and in writing.
Exactly. And the materials are designed to support this development in a really concrete and engaging way.
And you mentioned the sandpaper letters before, but there's also the movable alphabet, right?
Yes, exactly. So the movable alphabet allows kids to physically manipulate letters to create words and sentences.
It's that classic Montessori approach of taking something abstract,
Yeah.
like the concept of a letter or a word, and making it tangible.
Right, something they can experience with their hands.
And it's not just about learning to read and write. It's about developing this love of language, a fascination with words and their power.
Absolutely.
And that same hands-on approach is applied to math as well, right?
It is, yes. So the Montessori math materials,
Okay.
like the number rods and the bead chains, they help kids develop this really deep and intuitive understanding of mathematical concepts.
So instead of just memorizing formulas,
Right.
they're actually experiencing quantity, patterns, and relationships.
Exactly.
They're building that foundation for mathematical thinking
Right.
that will help them later on.
As they move on to those more complex concepts.
Now, I know assessment is often seen as a bit of a challenge in Montessori education.
It can be.
So how do you actually measure progress
Yeah.
when children are all learning at their own pace, following their own unique paths?
That's a great question. And it's one that Montessori educators have been thinking about for a long time.
Yeah, standardized testing doesn't really align with that individualized approach, does it?
Not really. No, it's a very different way of thinking about assessment.
So how do Montessori schools, especially those in the public sector, navigate that?
Well, there are a few different approaches.
Yeah.
Some schools adapt their practices to align with state testing requirements, while others focus on alternative forms of assessment,
What kinds of alternatives?
things like portfolios and observational records.
One of our sources mentioned the Ages and Stages questionnaire
Oh, yeah,
being used in Montessori settings.
the ASQ is a developmental screening tool
Okay.
that can help identify children who might need additional support. And it's been adapted for use in Montessori classrooms.
To better align with those principles of observation and individualized learning.
Exactly. It's about finding assessment tools that are meaningful
Yeah.
and respectful of each child's unique developmental journey.
So it's about looking beyond those standardized test scores
Right.
and really seeing the whole child, understanding their progress and potential in a more holistic way.
Absolutely.
Now, as we think about the lasting impact of Montessori education,
Yeah.
I'm curious about how it prepares children for the challenges of a world that's constantly changing.
That's a really important question.
We need more than just knowledge and skills these days.
For sure.
We need things like adaptability, resilience, critical thinking, and creativity
Yes,
to
absolutely.
navigate all the unknowns.
And I think Montessori provides a really strong foundation for developing those 21st century skills.
One of our sources, an article about the role of unlearning in justice and equity,
Right.
really emphasizes that importance of critical thinking
Yeah.
in a world that's overflowing with information.
And critical thinking is woven into the fabric of Montessori education from the very beginning.
How so?
Well, children are encouraged to ask questions,
Okay.
challenge assumptions, and think for themselves.
So they're not just passively absorbing information.
Right.
They're actively constructing their own understanding of the world.
Yeah, and that ability to analyze information,
Yeah.
evaluate evidence, and form their own conclusions
Yes.
is essential for navigating the digital age and beyond.
Absolutely. And it's not just about those cognitive skills either, right?
No, Montessori also fosters social emotional intelligence,
Okay.
which is so important for success in today's world.
So how does it do that?
Well, children learn to collaborate, communicate effectively, empathize with others, and resolve conflicts peacefully.
So they're developing the skills they need to build strong relationships,
Yeah.
work effectively in teams, and contribute positively to their communities. These are the skills that employers are looking for.
They are.
Those soft skills.
That social emotional intelligence.
Yeah, alongside, technical expertise.
Exactly.
It's interesting to think that Montessori education, in a sense, is preparing children not just for the world as it is, but for the world as it could be.
I like that, yeah.
It's about nurturing a generation of compassionate, innovative, and adaptable individuals who are capable of making a positive difference in the world.
And that brings us back to that concept of the cosmic task.
Yeah.
This idea that we all have this responsibility to care for our planet and each other.
Right, recognizing that interconnectedness, understanding that our actions have consequences that ripple outwards.
And Montessori education really helps to nurture that awareness from a young age.
So it's not just about individual achievement.
No.
It's about fostering that sense of collective purpose.
Right.
And a desire to contribute to something larger than oneself.
Yeah, I like that.
As we move into the final part of our deep dive,
Right.
I want to leave our listeners with this question to ponder.
Okay.
How can we create more learning environments that embrace these principles of Montessori and empower all children to reach their full potential?
That's a great question to think about.
We'll explore some possible answers in the next part of our deep dive,
Sounds good.
where we'll take a closer look at how these Montessori principles translate into practice
Yeah.
in different learning environments.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Montessori education, and I have to say, I'm really struck by how much more there is to this approach than meets the eye.
Right. Like we were saying earlier, there's this idea that it's just for little kids, but as we've seen, that's really not the whole picture.
Definitely not. Montessori programs actually work with a huge age range.
Yeah, from infancy all the way through adolescence,
Exactly.
and sometimes even beyond that.
Okay, I want to dig into what Montessori looks like for different age groups.
I'm especially curious about those really early years.
Yeah, the infant and toddler stage.
Right, before a kid even sets foot in a formal classroom.
One of our sources, an article on infant and toddler Montessori programs, talks about how these environments are all about those early developmental milestones.
So things like, exploring their surroundings?
Exactly. Exploring their surroundings, developing those motor skills, engaging all their senses.
Yeah, it makes sense that you'd want to create a space where they can really do all of that.
It's about creating that safe and nurturing environment for them to, just be.
And the caregiver's role seems really important here, too.
Oh, absolutely. One of our sources talked about the importance of responsive interactions.
Between caregivers and infants.
Right. Things like responding to their cries, making eye contact, imitating their sounds.
All those little things.
Yeah, those little things actually have a big impact on development.
They do. It's like they're laying the foundation for language development, for their social, emotional well-being, and that sense of security and trust.
And then as they get a little older, those early childhood years, between 3 and 6, the focus kind of shifts towards more structured learning.
Okay, so what does that look like in a Montessori classroom setting?
Well, one of our sources described the early childhood classroom as a carefully prepared environment.
Okay.
Filled with materials that are designed to meet the needs of those young children.
And those materials are so cool. We talked about them a little bit.
Right, like the knob cylinders, the pink tower, the sandpaper letters.
Yeah, they're all so beautifully made, and they look so engaging for kids.
They are, and they're carefully chosen to appeal to their senses, help them refine those motor skills, and introduce them to key concepts in that concrete, hands-on way.
And then as kids move into the elementary years, like between 6 and 12,
right,
how does the curriculum change?
Well, one of our sources talked about this stage being a time when kids are ready to, imagine big ideas, ask big questions, and really extend their thinking beyond the classroom.
So they're ready to take it to the next level.
Exactly, building on that foundation they've already got.
Yeah.
And the curriculum gets more complex.
Right.
It includes things like history, geography, botany, zoology, even physics.
Wow.
But it's still rooted in that same hands-on approach.
Yeah, that emphasis on inquiry.
And then those adolescent years, I'm curious about that because teenagers can be a tough crowd.
Oh, I know they can be.
How do you keep them engaged?
Yeah, and meet their unique needs at that stage.
Right. Adolescence is all about searching for your identity, meeting independence, and becoming more aware of social issues.
So how does Montessori address all of that?
One of our sources talked about Montessori secondary programs being designed to meet teenagers right where they are.
That makes sense.
It's not about trying to force them into a mold.
Right.
It's about giving them chances to explore their passions,
Okay.
develop their skills, and really contribute to their communities.
And to do it in a way that feels meaningful to them.
Exactly. And to recognize their need for autonomy and responsibility.
Yeah, that's so important at that age.
So it's about giving them more freedom and choice within a structured learning environment.
As we wrap up our deep dive today, I think it's important to acknowledge that while Montessori is a really powerful model for education, it's not without its challenges.
Oh, for sure. There are definitely challenges.
And opportunities, too.
Right.
One of the biggest ones we talked about earlier was ensuring that fidelity to the Montessori approach stays strong.
Yeah, especially as more and more public schools adopt it.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to balance those core principles of individualized learning and child-centeredness with things like standardized testing and government mandates.
Right. It's a balancing act.
And it's about making sure that all children have access to high-quality Montessori programs.
Absolutely. Regardless of where they live or their background.
Because that access and equity are essential if we really believe that this approach can make a difference.
I agree. And another challenge is making sure that Montessori adapts to meet the needs of our rapidly changing world.
Yeah, that's a good point.
One of our sources talked about how Montessori principles can be used to teach things like digital citizenship.
Oh, that's so important these days.
It really is. And it's about thinking carefully about how we integrate technology into the classroom.
Using it as a tool to enhance learning.
Yeah, not just a distraction.
And it's about giving kids those critical thinking skills they need to navigate the digital world.
To figure out what's real and what's fake. To be responsible online.
Our world is constantly changing, and the future of education depends on our ability to adapt and innovate.
To be open to new ideas.
While still holding on to those timeless principles that have always guided us.
And I think Montessori does a great job of striking that balance.
Yeah, with that focus on observation, on adapting to meet the needs of each child.
And on respecting their natural curiosity.
Right. It's about empowering children to be not just successful individuals, but also compassionate, engaged, and responsible citizens who can make the world a better place.
I like that.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of The Deep Dive.
It's been a great conversation.
I've learned so much, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too.
We encourage you to keep learning about the Montessori approach, whether you're a parent, an educator, or just someone who's interested in the power of education to change lives.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.